The abrupt silence was the first assault, a profound and sudden cessation of the subtle symphony of electricity that was the lifeblood of modern existence, a sound so constant its absence was a physical shock. One moment, the late afternoon air in Havenwood Hills hummed with the quiet industry of refrigerators, the soft whir of ceiling fans, the almost subliminal thrum of computers, and on Willow Lane, the gentle rhythmic sigh of medical machinery. The next, an oppressive void, a vacuum that sucked the breath from the ordinary. Then, as if the silence itself had become unbearable, the alarms began to shriek, a discordant and terrifying chorus, piercing the twilight. From Marcus Holloway's tidy bungalow, the high-pitched, insistent beep, beep, beep of his ventilator's backup power alarm was a frantic Morse code of impending crisis. A few doors down at Lena Petrova's home, a deeper, more guttural warning pulsed from her array of critical support systems, a sound that spoke of failing batteries and finite time. My own home, a comfortable two-story on Cedar Drive, was plunged into the same sudden dimness, but my concern wasn't for my melting ice cream or the unsaved document on my laptop. It was for the lives tethered to the grid on that specific cul-de-sac. My heart, usually steady from years of managing statewide crises, hammered against my ribs. This wasn't the familiar signature of a squirrel on a transformer or a branch down on a main line. Those events caused flickering a wider, more ragged collapse. This was too localized, too surgically precise, too targeted on the homes of our community's most vulnerable. The chilling finger of suspicion immediately pointed towards a singular venomous source. My hand, almost of its own volition, was already dialing my direct line the ingrained protocols of my office as State Energy Commissioner, kicking in even as the civilian, the neighbor in me, reeled. The immediate burning question wasn't just what had severed their lifeline, but who possessed such specific malice, and how they could have imagined, even for a moment, that such an act in my very own neighborhood would go unanswered. Unbeknownst to the architect of this darkness, they had just directly challenged the person responsible for every watt, every line, every safeguard of the entire state's energy infrastructure. Havenwood Hills, with its tree-lined avenues and aspirations of tranquil suburban living, had been my chosen refuge for nearly a decade. For me, Alex Ramsey, it represented a deliberate counterpoint to the relentless, high-stakes reality of my professional life. As State Energy Commissioner, I bore the weight of ensuring uninterrupted power for millions of homes, businesses, and critical services. My days were a labyrinth of policy debates, infrastructure planning, emergency response drills, and the ever-present threat of cyber attacks or catastrophic system failures. I recalled the ice storm of 19 sleepless days and nights in the State Operations Center, coordinating line crews across frozen landscapes, rerouting power around shattered substations. The faces of my exhausted team illuminated by the cold glow of countless monitors. The fate of hospitals and emergency shelters resting on our decisions. That kind of pressure, that constant vigilance demanded an anchor, and Havenwood Hills, with its predictable rhythms and the comforting anonymity of being just another resident, was meant to be that anchor. The scent of Mrs. Gable's prize-winning roses, battling the aroma of freshly cut grass on a Saturday morning, the cheerful arguments of kids playing street hockey, the quiet solidarity of neighbors raking leaves in the fall. These were the small vital currents that recharged my own overtaxed systems. Within this larger community, a smaller, more tightly knit circle had recently formed on Willow Lane, a newly developed cul-de-sac at the neighborhood's western edge. Here, several specially adapted homes had become sanctuaries for a group of disabled veterans. Marcus Holloway, a former Army sergeant whose broad shoulders still hinted at his past strength, now navigated life with the quiet dignity his severe respiratory compromise allowed. His days were measured by the rhythmic pulse of the ventilator that was his constant companion, its gentle hiss a background score to his existence. He was a man of few words, but immense warmth, his eyes still holding the spark of a keen observer. Lena Petrova, a former Air Force intelligence officer, faced the relentless advance of multiple sclerosis with a fierce intellect and a caustic wit that often masked her daily struggles. Her advanced electric wheelchair was an extension of her will, granting her mobility, while a BiPAP machine assisted her breathing through the difficult nights. She'd become an unexpected friend, our conversations ranging from geopolitical complexities to the merits of different bird feeders. There were others too. Old Bill Jenkins, a Navy man from a previous generation, whose failing heart required a sophisticated monitoring system. And young Sarah Moon, whose nerve damage necessitated a suite of powered orthopedic devices. Their homes were subtle fortresses of medical technology ramps, blending into landscaping grab bars, discreetly placed the faint hum of converters and chargers, a constant reminder of their delicate symbiosis with the electrical grid. For most of Havenwood Hills, these veterans were a source of quiet pride, their presence a testament to resilience their needs accommodated with unspoken respect. For Ms. Evelyn Croft, however, whose grand two-story colonial with its award-winning though rigidly formal English garden shared a property line with the rear of Willow Lane, their arrival was perceived as a blight. Her discontent hadn't started with overt hostility, but with a slow, seeping frost of disapproval. There were the subtle shifts in her demeanor when encountering the veterans or their caregivers in the local market, a tightening of her lips, a barely perceptible sniff, an appraisal that lingered a moment too long on a wheelchair or a portable oxygen tank. She was known for her exacting standards, her letters to the HOA about insufficiently trimmed hedges or the vulgarity of certain holiday decorations. Her own property was a monument to sterile perfection, every blade of grass seemingly measured, every bloom forced into rigid conformity. It was as if the organic, sometimes untidy reality of human frailty, particularly in such close proximity, offended her deeply ingrained sense of order, and perhaps her perception of her property's undiluted prestige. She saw their ramps not as pathways to independence, but as unsightly protrusions, heard the life-sustaining hum of their equipment not as a triumph of medical science, but as an irritating background drone that disturbed the natural acoustic ambiance she felt entitled to. Her early complaints were oblique, passed through other, more easily influenced neighbors, whispers about potential impacts on property values, concerns about the character of the neighborhood changing. The inciting incident, the moment Croft's simmering disdain transitioned into a direct and formal assault, arrived with the thud of official-looking envelopes in the mailboxes of the Willow Lane residents about 6 months before the blackout. Inside were multi-page, meticulously drafted complaints filed with both the Havenwood Hills Homeowners Association and the City Planning Department. Evelyn Croft, in language both florid and icily precise, laid out a litany of alleged violations. Marcus's backup generator, a standard sound-dampened model essential for his survival during outages, was decried as a persistent noise polluter that allegedly breached obscure decibel limits, despite records showing it was only tested briefly during daylight hours, well within regulations. Lena's gently sloping ramp, professionally installed and aesthetically integrated, was condemned as an unauthorized structural alteration that marred the visual harmony of the neighborhood, particularly Croft noted from the vantage point of her second-story sunroom. The presence of home healthcare aids vehicles and the occasional accessible transport van was characterized as creating intolerable traffic bottlenecks and parking scarcity on the quiet, dead-end street. The impact on the veterans was immediate and distressing. Already navigating complex medical routines and daily physical challenges, they were now thrust into a vortex of bureaucratic red tape. They had to gather service records for generators' produce permits for ramps that had been pre-approved and explain the necessity of their caregivers' presence. I attended one of the early HOA review meetings as an observer, my professional identity carefully concealed. I watched as Croft, dressed impeccably, presented her case with a veneer of pained reluctance, speaking of her deep respect for servicemen and women, but lamenting the unfortunate and unforeseen impact on the neighborhood's cherished quality of life. Her performance was masterful in its insincerity. I saw Lena, her voice tight with controlled anger, patiently explaining the function of each piece of equipment, the necessity of each modification. I saw Maria Holloway, Marcus's wife, her face etched with worry, trying to articulate how vital these things were, not just for comfort, but for Marcus's very breath. The HOA board, composed mostly of well-meaning but conflict-averse retirees, seemed flustered, caught between Croft's aggressive legalisms and the palpable vulnerability of the veterans. Ultimately, most of Croft's more outrageous claims were dismissed by both the city and a reluctant HOA, but the process itself was a form of punishment, stressful, time-consuming, and deeply invalidating. the invisible lines of community tension were drawn more sharply. Having largely failed in her attempt to dislodge or disable the veterans through official channels, Evelyn Croft embarked on a more insidious campaign, marking the first true escalation of her hostilities. She began to work the angles of HOA politics with a chilling precision, lobbying individual board members, presenting herself as a concerned citizen merely trying to uphold standards. At the next quarterly HOA meeting, she proposed a series of new bylaws, all artfully worded to avoid direct discrimination, but clearly targeted at the Willow Lane residents. There was a motion to strictly limit the operational hours for any auxiliary power units or similar mechanical devices, a clear jab at generator testing, and even some types of continuously running medical equipment. Another proposal sought to define non-standard landscaping features, including permanent or semi-permanent ramp structures, requiring additional aesthetic review and potential mitigation fees. Therefore, she even attempted to introduce restrictions on the duration for which service vehicles, a euphemism for caregivers' cars and medical transport, could be parked on community streets. During the meeting, she spoke with a practiced air of concern, her voice modulated to convey sorrow rather than aggression. "It is with a heavy heart," she intoned, dabbing at a dry eye with a lace-trimmed handkerchief, "that I bring these matters forth. But we must consider the collective good, the preservation of our shared environment, the very essence of what makes Havenwood Hills such a desirable place to live." Her performance was designed to isolate the veterans, to paint their essential needs as unreasonable demands that burdened the wider community. She began a subtle social offensive too, spreading carefully curated whispers during her garden club meetings or over tea with influential neighbors. She'd sigh about the noises from Willow Lane or the unfortunate appearance of certain homes, always framing it as a reluctant observation, a shared burden. The effect was corrosive. Some neighbors, previously friendly, became more distant towards the veterans, their nods cooler, their conversations shorter. The veterans felt the chill, the slow creeping sense of being ostracized within their own community. They discussed it amongst themselves, Marcus's quiet stoicism, a counterpoint to Lena's fiery indignation. "She's trying to wear us down," Lena had said one afternoon, her knuckles white on her joystick control. "Make us feel like the problem." The campaign of attrition then took a more direct and menacing turn, escalating into acts of overt intimidation. The incident with Lena's medical transport was a stark example. Lena had a critical neurologist appointment, one she couldn't afford to miss, for which specialized transport was arranged. The van, equipped with a hydraulic lift, needed clear access to her driveway ramp. On that particular morning, Lena's caregiver, a kind, no-nonsense woman named Carla, arrived to find Evelyn Croft's enormous recycling and yard waste bins, far more than her usual output, strategically positioned to completely obstruct the end of Lena's driveway. Croft was in her front garden, meticulously deadheading roses, a picture of serene absorption. When Carla politely requested she move the bins, explaining the imminent arrival of the medical van, Croft had looked up, a small knowing smile playing on her lips. "Oh, my dear, are those in the way? How unfortunate. Today is, of course, collection day. The city is quite insistent they be at the curb. Such a narrow street, isn't it? One must make allowances." Her tone was honey-sweet, her eyes cold. The bins were far from the curb and clearly placed with intent. The medical transport was delayed by nearly 45 minutes as Carla and the driver struggled to maneuver Lena safely from a less accessible side door, causing Lena significant physical discomfort and acute anxiety about missing her vital consultation. She made the appointment, but just barely, her stress levels dangerously elevated. Croft had watched the entire spectacle from her porch, occasionally offering unhelpful suggestions with an air of detached amusement. There was no mistaking the calculated cruelty. It was a targeted disruption designed to assert dominance and inflict distress. Marcus, too, experienced a more direct form of harassment. His condition necessitated periods of deep rest, especially in the afternoons, to conserve his energy. Suddenly, a new pattern emerged from Croft's adjacent property. Loud, jarring construction noises, the whine of a power, saw the percussive impact of a hammer, the roar of what sounded like a leaf blower directly against their shared fence, would erupt precisely during his scheduled rest periods, often lasting just long enough to thoroughly disrupt his sleep before ceasing as abruptly as they began. These were not sustained projects, but short, sharp bursts of noise, always well within daytime ordinance hours, but clearly timed for maximum personal impact. When Maria, his wife, had attempted to speak to Croft over the fence, expressing concern and politely asking if the work could be scheduled differently, Croft had feigned complete ignorance. "Noise, my dear, I haven't heard a thing. Perhaps it's the wind, or maybe some of Mr. Holloway's own machinery is acting up. One must be so careful with those complex devices." The denial was so blatant, so dismissive, it left Maria trembling with helpless frustration. Croft was demonstrating her power to invade their sanctuary, to disturb their peace with impunity. There were other smaller aggressions, garden sprinklers, accidentally misdirected to soak a veteran's accessible pathway just before they needed to use it, complaints lodged with the Postal Service about the obstruction caused by a temporarily parked caregiver's car, resulting in warning notices. Each incident taken alone might seem petty, but together they formed a relentless pattern of bullying, a clear attempt to tuak joat kwayen loi, to deprive the veterans of their right to live peacefully and safely. The midpoint twist, the critical juncture, where my simmering unease as a neighbor began to coalesce with my professional responsibilities as Energy Commissioner, arrived via an unexpected phone call. Gus O'Malley, a veteran senior lineman with Havenwood Power and Light, was on the line. I knew Gus professionally. He was a straight shooter, highly competent, someone whose field observations I valued. He often liaised with my office on grid maintenance issues, though he was unaware that Havenwood Hills, his current work zone, was also my home. "Commissioner Ramsey," Gus began, his usually jovial voice tinged with concern. "Thought I should give you a heads up on something a bit out of the ordinary we found during routine inspections today. We were checking the J47 pad-mounted distribution transformer, the one feeding that little Willow Lane cul-de-sac off Cedar. Found the primary tamper seals on the secondary access panel had been sliced. Clean cut. Nothing looked immediately compromised inside at the time. Voltage was stable, connections seemed tight. But it's damn irregular. Those seals are tough. Takes intent to break them." My blood turned to ice. The J47, Willow Lane, the exclusive feeder for the veterans' homes. "Anything else?" Gus, I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "Well," he continued, "it might be nothing, but one of the longtime residents on Cedar, a Mrs. Henderson, mentioned something while we were working. Said she's seen a woman from that big corner house, the one with the fancy garden backs onto Willow, walking her little white dog past that J47 box a lot. More than usual, she thought. Said she even saw her fiddling around the base of it a few weeks back late one evening. Thought she was just picking up litter or something at the time, but with the broken seals, well, it stuck in her mind. Evelyn Croft." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't just about HOA complaints or misplaced bins anymore. This suggested a chilling escalation, a potential exploration of a far more dangerous form of attack. My mind trained to see vulnerabilities in complex systems immediately began to race through the schematics of a pad-mounted transformer like the J47, the access points, the breaker mechanisms, the catastrophic potential of a deliberate short or a compromised phase sequencer, especially on a localized loop serving medically fragile individuals. "Gus," I said, the professional in me taking full command, "this is extremely serious. Document everything meticulously. Photograph the broken seals, the panel, anything that looks even slightly disturbed. I want a full diagnostic run on that unit at the earliest opportunity and discreetly enhance any monitoring you have on that part of the grid. Send me the detailed engineering schematics for J47 and its immediate upstream and downstream connections directly. And Gus, keep this observation strictly confidential for now." He readily agreed, sensing the unstated gravity. After the call, I pulled up the Havenwood Hills grid map on my secure home terminal, zooming in on the J47 node. Its isolation, serving only that small cul-de-sac, made it a disturbingly perfect target for localized disruption. A cold dread settled in my stomach. Croft wasn't just a malicious neighbor. She was reconnoitering critical infrastructure, and I had a terrible feeling I knew why. The thought that her vendetta might extend to weaponizing the very energy I was sworn to protect was a deeply personal and professional affront. I made a mental note to arrange for an unmarked state utility security team to do a quiet drive-by assessment of similar local transformers in other neighborhoods, just in case this indicated a broader, though unlikely pattern. For now, Willow Lane was my primary concern. And then came that Tuesday, the day the fragile peace shattered. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the western sky in hues of apricot and lavender. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, carrying the distant scent of someone's late-season roses. I was in my home study reviewing a complex proposal for integrating new renewable energy sources into the state grid, the dense technical language usually a welcome challenge. The first sign was an almost imperceptible flicker of the lights, a brief hesitation in the steady current, like the grid drawing a quick, shallow breath. Then, absolute, plunging silence. The hum of my computer died, the display going black. The digital clock on my desk vanished. The silence pressed in, heavy and unnatural, before being ripped apart by that first terrible shriek from Willow Lane. Then another and another, the distinct, urgent tones of medical alarms. My training, my instincts, my fury all ignited simultaneously. I was out of my chair and halfway to the door before the first coherent thought formed. She finally did it. My fingers were already flying across my secure phone, punching in the direct code for the State Energy Operations Center. "This is Commissioner Ramsey Code Red." I snapped, using the highest priority override. Immediate, unscheduled, hyper-localized outage, Havenwood Hills residential sector grid, coordinates Foxtrot 79er, specifically impacting Willow Lane cul-de-sac and immediately adjacent properties. Substation feeder is K12. Likely casualty is distribution point J47. I am on scene. I assess high probability of deliberate, malicious tampering with critical infrastructure, potential life-threatening situation for medically vulnerable residents. Authorize immediate Level 1 emergency dispatch, senior line crew, full diagnostic and repair capability rolling within 3 minutes. Notify Havenwood Police Department of a Class A infrastructure security breach. Request immediate patrol and investigative unit. Notify County EMS potential multiple casualties. Advise standby at designated rendezvous. I need real-time telemetry on K12 and J47 now. The duty supervisor at the ops center, a seasoned pro named Henderson, no relation to the observant neighbor, ironically didn't waste a syllable. Acknowledged, Commissioner. Code Red confirmed. Level 1 dispatch activated. K12, telemetry shows sudden complete load drop consistent with catastrophic failure or manual trip at J47. HPD and EMS notified ETAs pending. Your direct line is patched to field crew supervisor. Updates forthcoming. Understood. I was already running not on adrenaline alone, but on a cold, focused rage. The scene on Willow Lane was one of controlled, desperate chaos. Flashlight beams sliced through the rapidly deepening twilight, illuminating terrified faces. Maria Holloway was at Marcus's front window, her silhouette stark against the pulsing red emergency light of his ventilator. I could hear her strained voice trying to manually operate the ambu bag, a physically exhausting task. "Hold on, Marcus. Hold on, breathe with me, breathe." Lena Petrova was on her small porch, her own face illuminated by the eerie green glow of her wheelchair's dying control panel. Her voice, though laced with fear, was surprisingly steady as she spoke into her own phone, likely to emergency services or a family member. "Yes, the power is completely out. All my primary systems are down. Backup battery on the BiPAP is critical. Maria." I yelled, reaching Marcus's porch, just as a Havenwood PD cruiser lights strobing skidded to a halt at the entrance to the cul-de-sac. "What's his immediate status? How long can the vent backup run? Alex, oh, thank God, thank God." Her voice was tight with panic, her hands trembling as she worked the bag. "The main ventilator is completely dead. Backup battery engaged, but it's already flashing low charge, maybe 30 minutes 40 at best. And his oxygen concentrator is offline too. I have a portable tank, but connecting it in this dark..." "Okay, Maria, stay focused on the bagging. Keep his rhythm as steady as you can. The best utility crew in the state is less than 5 minutes out. Help is coming." I turned towards Lena's house. "Lena, what's your situation?" "Alex, my chair's almost dead and my BiPAP backup is showing maybe 20 minutes if I'm lucky." She called back, her usual resilience strained. "Old Bill Jenkins's monitor is screaming bloody murder too. His daughter just called me in a panic." This was a cascade failure of lifelines. Every minute was an eternity. The wail of approaching sirens, multiple tones, now grew louder. The heavy-duty rumble of a utility truck and the higher pitch of an ambulance. The first Havenwood Power and Light emergency response vehicle. A large truck, bristling with equipment, roared onto Willow Lane, its powerful floodlights cutting through the darkness. Gus O'Malley at the wheel, he and his partner, a younger lineman named Cardenas, were out almost before the truck stopped, their faces grim and focused. "Commissioner," Gus shouted over the din of alarms and arriving emergency vehicles. "Report. Gus J47 is the definite patient 0. I said, my voice hard. "It's been deliberately taken out. I need power restored to these homes now. Priority 1 is bypass or immediate repair. Treat the entire unit as a crime scene. Minimal contact, document everything you touch. These people are on borrowed time." "Understood, sir." Yuck. Gus and Cardenas, donning heavy insulated gloves and headlamps, moved with the swift, practiced efficiency of professionals who understood dire stakes. They headed directly for the inert green metal box at the head of the cul-de-sac. As they began their assessment, their movements precise and economical under the stark glare of the truck's spotlights, I saw it. A flicker of movement from the deep shadows of Evelyn Croft's prize-winning, and now ominously dark, rose garden. She was standing there, partially concealed by a large trellis, laden with pale, ghostly blooms, a still silent observer. Her face, just visible in the reflected emergency lights, was unreadable, but there was no sign of neighborly concern, no alarm, merely a cold, watchful stillness. It was the detached curiosity of a scientist observing an experiment whose variables were human lives. The sight of her so composed amidst the terror she had almost certainly orchestrated sent a fresh wave of icy fury through me. She had no concept, no inkling of the institutional storm she had just unleashed, or of the personal resolve she had ignited in the state energy commissioner, who also happened to be her neighbor. The next hour was a high-wire act of desperation and expertise, the true climax of Evelyn Croft's malicious campaign. Gus and Cardenas worked with furious concentration at the J47 transformer, its access panel prized open, revealing the complex guts within. "Confirmed tampering, Commissioner." Gus yelled over the noise, his voice tight with anger. "Main disconnect was manually thrown with extreme force, looks like they used a pry bar, and the phase sequencing interlock, it's been deliberately short-circuited with a heavy gauge wire. This wasn't a casual vandal, sir. This was someone who knew enough to bypass basic safeties and cause a targeted catastrophic shutdown, and they did it dirty, real dirty." More police units had arrived, establishing a perimeter, their blue and red lights painting strobing surreal patterns across the terrified faces of the Willow Lane residents and the growing crowd of concerned neighbors from further down Cedar Drive. Paramedics, their kits open and ready, moved between Marcus's and Lena's homes, checking vital signs, offering what support they could while power remained out. Maria's arms were visibly tiring from the constant effort of manual ventilation. Lena's caregiver was anxiously monitoring the fading display on the BiPAP. I was a nexus of communication, one ear on my secure comm line to the Energy Ops Center, getting real-time updates on grid stability as we prepared for a potential surge when J47 came back online. The other coordinating with Detective DeLuca, a sharp, no-nonsense investigator from Havenwood PD, who had just arrived and taken command of the police response. Commissioner Ramsey. Detective DeLuca stated, her eyes missing nothing as she surveyed the scene. "Your initial dispatch call mentioned a high probability of deliberate action and identified a potential area of prior concern. The utility crew's initial findings seem to bear that out unequivocally. Do you have specific intelligence or ongoing concerns regarding any individual who might possess both the motive and the means for such an attack?" My gaze shifted just for a second towards Croft's house, where the shadowy figure still lurked. "Detective," I said, my voice low and firm, "there has been a documented history of escalating harassment by the resident of that corner property, Ms. Evelyn Croft, specifically targeting the veterans residing on Willow Lane. Their medical equipment, their accessible homes, their very presence has been a source of her expressed displeasure. Furthermore, I received credible, though at the time, uncorroborated information some weeks ago, suggesting Ms. Croft had shown an unusual and unauthorized interest in the operational status and physical access points of this specific J47 utility box. Detective DeLuca's eyes, already keen, sharpened further. Evelyn Croft. She spoke the name into her shoulder mic, presumably to a dispatcher running an immediate background check. We will need to have a conversation with Ms. Croft without delay. Just then, a triumphant shout from Gus. Got it. We've isolated the fried sequencer and rigged a temporary bypass around the damaged section. It's ugly, but it'll hold. Stand by to energize Willow Lane. Energizing. Now. A collective gasp, almost a prayer, went up from the onlookers, as one by one, the lights in the afflicted homes flickered, hesitated, then blazed back to life. The cacophony of medical alarms abruptly silenced, replaced by the steady, reassuring hum of restored power. Marcus's ventilator let out a strong, rhythmic sigh. Lena, visible in her now brightly lit window, gave a shaky but emphatic thumbs up. The immediate life-threatening crisis was averted. The wave of relief was immense, almost palpable, but the pursuit of justice was only just beginning. Detective DeLuca, flanked by a uniformed officer, and with me trailing a few steps behind, as an expert witness if needed, walked with grim purpose across the dew-dampened grass towards Evelyn Croft's meticulously manicured lawn. She hadn't moved from her position by the rose trellis, a ghostly figure amidst her perfect blooms. Ms. Evelyn Croft. Detective DeLuca's voice was devoid of accusation, professionally flat, yet carried an undeniable weight of authority. Yes, is there some sort of problem? Officer. Croft's voice, when it came, was a masterpiece of feigned bewilderment, tinged with a hint of affront, as if the preceding hour of frantic emergency activity, the sirens, the flashing lights, the near tragedies unfolding mere yards away had been nothing more than a slightly inconvenient street theater production. We are conducting an investigation into a severe and deliberate disruption of the public utility power supply on Willow Lane, Ms. Croft DeLuca stated, her gaze locked on the older woman. The outage appears to have been caused by intentional and malicious tampering with the primary distribution transformer serving those homes. We have received information that you have been observed in close proximity to that utility box on multiple prior occasions and showing an interest in its workings. A subtle tremor passed through Croft's carefully composed facade. A flicker of something, was it calculation annoyance or the first pinprick of fear, crossed her features before being instantly smoothed over by a mask of indignant denial. I frequently take my constitutional walks in the evening, detective. The neighborhood is generally quite safe. I certainly have not touched, nor would I have the faintest idea how to touch any of that complex electrical equipment. The very suggestion is preposterous. Her voice dripped with the cultivated disdain of the unjustly accused. We also have numerous documented reports, Ms. Croft. DeLuca pressed on, her tone relentless, of ongoing and escalating disputes, bordering on harassment, that you have initiated with the residents of Willow Lane, particularly those reliant on powered medical equipment. Croft drew herself up, an almost theatrical gesture of wounded propriety. I, detective, have merely insisted, as is my right as a homeowner and a concerned member of this community, that all residents abide by established bylaws and maintain certain standards. Some individuals, it seems, believe their circumstances grant them an exemption from common courtesy and aesthetic responsibility. It was at that moment I stepped forward, moving into the spill of light from a nearby street lamp, ensuring she could see me clearly. Ms. Croft. I began, my voice quiet but resonant, each word carefully chosen. My name is Alex Ramsey. I live just down the street on Cedar Drive. You may know me as your neighbor. What you almost certainly do not know, however, is that I am also the state energy commissioner for this entire state, the individual ultimately responsible for the security and integrity of our electrical grid. The transformation in Evelyn Croft was instantaneous and profound. The blood visibly drained from her face, leaving her skin a sickly, papery white beneath her carefully applied makeup. Her eyes, which had been darting with a show of offended bewilderment, now fixed on me with a dawning, unadulterated horror. The carefully constructed edifice of her arrogance, her entitlement, her belief in her own untouchability crumbled into dust in that single stark moment of revelation. State Energy Commissioner. The words, spoken quietly in the cool night air, landed with the force of a physical blow. She had meticulously planned her attack chosen. Her victims targeted the infrastructure, all while entirely oblivious to the fact that the ultimate guardian of that very infrastructure lived practically on her doorstep, watching, listening, and now acting. Her mouth opened a small, aghast O, then snapped shut. For the very first time since this ordeal began, Evelyn Croft, the woman of endless complaints and cutting remarks, was utterly devastatingly speechless. The game was over. The checkmate was absolute. The falling action was as swift as it was inexorable. The forensic team summoned by Detective DeLuca worked through the night under powerful floodlights at the J47 box. They recovered damning evidence, clear fingerprints from Evelyn Croft on the internal casing of the main disconnect switch, microscopic traces of her prize-winning Zephyrine Drauhin rose pollen on the pry bar, hastily discarded in the bushes near the transformer, and even a partial shoe print matching her expensive gardening clogs in the soft earth beside the unit. The subsequent warranted search of her home and meticulously organized garden had yielded even more, a set of high-voltage insulated wire cutters, electrical tape, matching that found at the scene, and most damningly a printed-out annotated schematic of the J47 distribution transformer downloaded from an obscure utility maintenance forum with the critical phase sequencer clearly circled in red ink. Mrs. Henderson's earlier testimony about Croft's suspicious behavior near the box, coupled with Gus O'Malley's report of the previously broken tamper seals, painted an irrefutable picture of calculated premeditation and escalating intent. Evelyn Croft was formally arrested before dawn, charged with multiple counts of aggravated assault with potential for grievous bodily harm, reckless endangerment of medically vulnerable persons, and felony destruction of critical energy infrastructure, a charge that carried severe state and potential federal penalties. Her booking photo, stripped of her usual hauteur, showed a woman diminished, bewildered, and finally afraid. The Havenwood Hills community, initially rocked by the sheer audacity and cold-blooded cruelty of Croft's actions, reacted with a surge of protective solidarity. Willow Lane became a focal point of support. Neighbors organized meal trains for the affected veterans and their families, offered to run errands, and simply sat with them, providing comfort and a sense of security. An impromptu neighborhood watch was reestablished, its members now acutely aware of the potential for threats to emerge not from outside, but from within their own carefully curated enclave. The incident terrifying, as it had been acted as a powerful catalyst, stripping away layers of suburban complacency and forging a more vigilant, interconnected, and compassionate community fabric. In my official capacity, the work was just beginning. The Havenwood Hills attack, as it quickly became known in internal state briefings, served as a brutal wake-up call. I immediately convened a statewide task force to conduct an urgent review of security protocols for all localized energy distribution points, particularly those serving healthcare facilities and known clusters of medically vulnerable residents. More significantly, I personally spearheaded the drafting and introduction of what became known as the Vulnerable Residents Energy Security Act. This landmark piece of legislation, fast-tracked through the state legislature with overwhelming bipartisan support, fueled by public outrage over the Havenwood Hills case, mandated sweeping changes. It required all utility providers to establish and maintain a confidential registry of customers critically dependent on electrical medical equipment, ensuring they receive priority restoration during outages and proactive welfare checks. It established a state-funded grant program to assist low-income and vulnerable households in acquiring and maintaining reliable backup power systems, such as whole-house generators or advanced battery arrays. Crucially, it dramatically increased the criminal penalties for any tampering with or malicious destruction of energy infrastructure, classifying such acts as high-level felonies, especially when such actions knowingly endangered human life. The act also mandated improved secure communication channels between healthcare providers, emergency management agencies, and utility companies to ensure a more coordinated and rapid response to the needs of at-risk individuals during any grid disruption. The ripples of Evelyn Croft's hateful act were ironically creating waves of positive protective change far beyond the confines of our small neighborhood. The resolution of Evelyn Croft's legal battle arrived approximately 8 months after her arrest. Faced with an insurmountable mountain of irrefutable evidence, the public testimony of the veterans she had terrorized, and the chilling technical details of her deliberate sabotage laid out by utility experts and my own office. Her high-priced legal team advised her against a trial. She pleaded guilty to a significantly reduced but still substantial list of felony charges, including multiple counts of aggravated endangerment and willful destruction of critical infrastructure. The sentencing judge, a stern, experienced jurist, listened intently as Maria Holloway and Lena Petrova delivered powerful victim impact statements, their voices trembling but firm as they described the terror of that night and the preceding months of harassment. In his sentencing remarks, the judge excoriated Croft for her cold, calculated, and unconscionable cruelty, her profound betrayal of communal trust, and her utter disregard for the sanctity of human life. Evelyn Croft was sentenced to a lengthy term in state prison, with no possibility of early parole for a significant portion of that term. She was also ordered to pay substantial financial restitution, covering the full costs of the emergency response, the damage to the utility equipment, and a considerable sum allocated for ongoing support and trauma counseling for the veterans and their families. Her pristine colonial home and its award-winning garden were seized under asset forfeiture laws and subsequently sold the proceeds directed to the restitution fund and to bolster the newly established state grant program for vulnerable residents' backup power systems. Havenwood Hills, and indeed the entire state, had delivered an unequivocal message. Such acts of malice, particularly against the most vulnerable, would be met with the full, unyielding force of the law. A year after that terrible night, Willow Lane felt transformed. The oppressive shadow of Evelyn Croft's hostility had lifted, replaced by an atmosphere of relaxed vigilance and strengthened neighborly bonds. The Vulnerable Residents Energy Security Act was now fully implemented across the state, its provisions already making a tangible difference. Marcus Holloway and Lena Petrova were among the first in Havenwood Hills to receive state-of-the-art, fully integrated backup power generators through the new grant program, their homes now fortresses of energy independence, their peace of mind immeasurably enhanced. The community gathered one crisp autumn afternoon in the small park at the end of Cedar Drive, not far from the now heavily reinforced and monitored J47 distribution box. It was an informal celebration of resilience, of shared survival. Marcus, his voice clear and stronger than it had been in years, thanks to the uninterrupted consistency of his medical support, spoke of gratitude and the power of good people standing together. Lena, her wit as sharp as ever, joked wryly that thanks to Ms. Croft's unwitting civic contribution, she now possessed a backup power system more reliable than the mayor's. Old Bill Jenkins's daughter pushed his wheelchair, a quiet smile on her face, knowing his vital signs were now doubly protected. Children played, their laughter echoing free from the undercurrent of fear that had briefly gripped their parents. I stood slightly apart, watching them all, my neighbors, my friends. The dual roles I inhabited, Alex Ramsey of Havenwood Hills and Commissioner Ramsey of the state capitol, had collided in a way I could never have anticipated. The experience had been a crucible, forging a deeper understanding of the human impact of the vast, impersonal infrastructure I oversaw. It was a stark reminder that behind every switch, every line, every kilowatt, were individual lives, hopes, and vulnerabilities. The darkness Evelyn Croft had sought to unleash had in the end only served to illuminate the profound importance of that interconnectedness, the vital necessity of compassion, and the enduring strength of a community united against malice. The lights in Havenwood Hills and across the state burned brightly that evening, a steady, reassuring glow. They were a testament not just to a secure and resilient power grid, but to the unwavering human spirit's capacity to transform even the most venomous acts into catalysts for profound and lasting good. The hum of electricity was no longer just a utility. It was a lifeline, a promise, kept a vigil maintained.